Today's episode is the story of Michael Morton, an American who was accused of being responsible for his wife's death and sentenced to life in prison. However, after some twists and turns in the case and a new suspect was named, things changed completely. 25 years later. Michael Morton was born on August 12, 1954, in Texas, United States. In 1976, while attending university, he met Christine Kirkpatrick, born on April 18, 1955. Though they pursued different courses, they shared a common passion for psychology. At 22 years old, Michael was considered shy and calm, but sarcastic, and sometimes bordered on impoliteness. Christine, then 21, was described as popular and determined. They were opposites, and their contrasting personalities created an unexpected attraction. He was captivated by her flowing black hair and striking blue eyes, while she was drawn to this mysterious and discreet boy. After some conversation in the shared areas of the university, they began dating. 3 years later, in 1979, they got married, and Christine Kirkpatrick became Christine Morton. In 1981, Christine became pregnant for the first time at age 26. Sadly, she miscarried before reaching 6 months, leaving the couple devastated as they had eagerly anticipated becoming parents. Almost 2 years later, she became pregnant again, and in June 1983, Eric was born, the couple's only child. However, the boy was born with health challenges. He had a delicate condition in his esophagus that required immediate surgery. The surgery was very successful, but Eric was soon diagnosed with severe congenital heart disease and would need a new and very complex surgical procedure only possible when he turned 3. Despite his health struggles, Eric was a sensitive, resilient child. By June 1986, he had grown strong enough to undergo the critical heart surgery. After a complex and successful procedure, Eric's health took a positive turn, and he became a more energetic, vibrant child. On August 12, 1986, Michael's 32nd birthday, the family decided to go out to celebrate not only his birthday, but also the success of his son's surgery. So they all went together to a well-known restaurant in the city. After what seemed like a pleasant evening, the family returned home. Christine tucked Eric into bed, and when she joined Michael in their bedroom, he appeared eager to share an intimate moment. Christine, however, declined, explaining that she was too tired and wanted to rest. The next morning, August 13th, Michael woke up around 5 a.m. to get ready for his early shift at work. He worked at a market which started at 6 a.m. He left a note for his wife and left home at 5:30 a.m. Later, around 2 p.m., as he routinely did, Michael went to Eric's nanny to pick him up, expecting Christine had dropped him off there before heading to work. But upon arrival, he was surprised to learn that Eric hadn't been brought over. Growing concerned, Michael called his home from the nanny's phone. To his shock, the call was answered not by Christine, but by a man, Sheriff Wood, who asked Michael to come home immediately due to a serious situation. When he arrived, he was shocked by what he saw. The street was closed. Many people gathered on the corner, and his house was surrounded by yellow banners. It was not necessary for someone to explain to him that something tragic had happened there. Michael, still in despair, identified himself as the resident of the house in the crowd and was allowed entry. Once inside, the sheriff asked him to sit on the couch and then delivered the devastating news. The police had been called by a neighbor who had seen Eric alone in the front yard of the house. wearing nothing but underwear and a t-shirt. This neighbour grew worried as time passed, and Christine, who was always a very careful mother, hadn't come to check on him. So she went to the place, looked around the house for Christine and couldn't find her. The doorbell rang, but no one answered. Afraid that something like her fainting and needing help might have happened, this neighbour entered the house through the open back door, and when she arrived in the couple's bedroom, she found Christine's lifeless body, brutally injured and showing signs of assault. According to what the police reported, it appeared that Christine had been struck by an object probably made of wood. There were semen stains on the bed sheets, which pointed to probable sexual violence. They also noticed that although Christine's purse was missing from the scene, her engagement and wedding rings, which were very expensive, and other valuable family belongings remained untouched. Michael was taken to the police station. He could barely speak through his shock and grief. He was crying a lot, and after being interrogated for a few hours, he was released. However, he couldn't return to his house, as it had been closed for investigation. He went to his parents' house and asked his mother-in-law to stay with Eric in those first days, as he was not psychologically capable of taking care of his son. Despite her own heartbreak, Christine's mother agreed, recognizing that her grandson needed stability. During a thorough search of the house, police discovered the note Michael had left that morning for Christine. In it, he expressed some disappointment over her reluctance the previous night, especially as it had been his birthday. The note reflected his frustration, along with questions about how she might feel if roles were reversed. He ended with, "I love you." Authorities took this as a sign of strain in their relationship, which they used as potential evidence against Michael, now considered the prime suspect. The next day, August 14th, a blue bandana stained with blood containing strands of hair was discovered at a construction site, approximately 100 meters from the Morton family home. Due to its suspicious nature, the bandana was promptly handed over to the authorities. Christine's mother was interviewed and told the police that Eric had seen some of what happened in the house. The boy described the assailant as a monster, mentioning that he wore gloves and had a large moustache. An important detail. At that time, Michael also had a moustache, but Eric said that man wasn't his father. Interviews with neighbours brought forward another significant detail. Several neighbours had noticed an unfamiliar green van parked around the neighbourhood in the days leading to the crime. The van had moved to various locations, often positioning itself behind the Mortons' house. In investigating the family's financial records, authorities uncovered a curious detail. After Eric's recovery from surgery, an unknown individual had gifted him $20 check. Since Eric was only 3, the check had been made out to Christine. This check, however, had gone missing with Christine's purse on the day of the crime. The owner of the check account eventually ended up cancelling the sheet, but someone had still managed to withdraw the money. Experts also identified that Christine's credit card resurfaced after a woman tried to use it in a jewellery store. In those days, nothing was digital. Credit card transactions were manually verified. They used the card on a high-relief reading machine, and store owners would call the bank centre to confirm whether the card had a limit or not. During the call, the retailer was informed that the card had been cancelled. The woman just left the card in the store and walked away. Despite the lack of direct evidence implicating Michael, aside from the note he had left, he was arrested 6 weeks after the crime on suspicion of murder. His lawyers soon secured a habeas corpus, allowing him to await trial out of custody. However, on September 25, 1986, just after Michael had resumed a semblance of normalcy, Sheriff Wood arrived with news of a new arrest warrant. Heartbreakingly, Michael had to hand his son over to the authorities before being taken back to jail, where he would remain until trial. The trial began the following year on February 9th, 1987. Unfortunately, there are not many details about these hearings, but they are summarized in the following information. Michael pleaded not guilty. He even waived an agreement where he would have been entitled to parole if he confessed to the crime, but according to Michael himself, the truth was all he had. He did not intend to confess to a crime he had not committed and was waiting for the truth to come to light. The defense argued that an intruder had attacked Christine after Michael left for work, while the prosecution contended that Michael, enraged over his wife's refusal to be intimate on his birthday, had brutally beaten her to death in a fit of rage. Michael's attorneys insisted that the main evidence supporting his innocence was being withheld from the case. This included the blood-stained bandana, the suspicious check withdrawal, the attempted use of Christine's credit card, the neighbor's testimony about the unfamiliar green van, and Eric's description of the monster he saw, evidence that the defense team was never given the opportunity to review. Additionally, Michael had been verified to be at work all morning. However, the prosecution argued that the crime could have occurred any time before his departure. The trial was very quick. It ended just a week later on February 17th, and Michael Morton was found guilty of first-degree murder and received a life sentence and a fine to the state of $5,000. In March 1987, his lawyers filed an appeal asking for a new trial, so that this time all the evidence was properly analysed, but the request was denied by the court. On March 22, 1990, in the initial testing phase with DNA tests, a test was requested on the semen found on the sheets, but according to the results of the tests, the semen belonged to Michael. This was an attempt to see if they could identify another person, because it was logical that they would find his DNA in the couple's own bed. Eric, who had lost his mother, and in a way his father too, was placed in custody of Christine's younger sister, Marilee. Following consultations with a psychiatrist, the court ruled that Marilee should bring Eric to visit his father in prison at least twice a year. At first, Eric, who was still very young, didn't really understand what was happening. He went on visits with his strollers and talked with his father in the prison courtyard. Michael wrote several letters to his son, but these letters were discarded by his aunt and were never delivered. As Eric grew older, he became increasingly distant from his father. By 1993, at the age of 10, he referred to his aunt as Mom during a visit, a painful moment for Michael, who realized that his son was rewriting his own life story without him. It saddened him deeply, fearing that Eric was gradually losing the connection to his family as it had been before the tragedy. In 1998, at the age of 15, Eric made his final visit to Michael, a visit that could have lasted about 2 hours but ended up lasting 5 minutes. Eric warned that he would no longer visit him in prison, and Michael, despite being extremely sad, agreed. He understood that there was little left to bridge the distance between them. Around the time Eric stopped visiting, his Aunt Marilee married Paul Olson. When Eric turned 18, he legally changed his surname to Olson, symbolically renouncing his father's name. This news devastated Michael, who felt he had lost his son for good. In early 2005, 18 years after Michael's conviction, new information surfaced. In January 1988, a murder had occurred less than 20 kilometers from the Morton home. The case had gone cold due to lack of evidence, but the crime bore chilling similarities to Christine's murder. A woman named Deborah Masters Baker had been beaten to death in her bed, showing signs of abuse. On February 11, 2005, Michael's defense requested DNA testing on several items from the crime scene, including the bandana and pieces of Christine's fingernails that were in the police files, so that this material could be compared to the homicide evidence. Deborah's hitherto unsolved case, as they did not believe the similarity between the cases was a mere coincidence. On August 15, 2006, the Williamson County Court allowed tests on only a few items, such as the nail clippings, but denied tests on the bandana and evidence of the crime against Deborah. The authorized tests returned inconclusive results, prompting the defense to appeal for a full analysis of all items. Finally, on October 8, 2008, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott ordered Michael's lawyers to have access to all court documents, which had been withheld from them since the trial. This way, for the first time, they had access to the transcription of Eric's conversation with his grandmother, talking about the day of the crime, as well as being able to calmly analyze the neighbors' statements about the green van and the reports that talked about the credit card and the fraudulent check. On January 8, 2010, the Austin Court of Appeals allowed DNA testing on the bandana. The results were ready on June 30, 2011. The examination report confirmed that the biological material on the bandana belonged to Christine Morton and another man who was not Michael. The search now focused on identifying this unknown male, so the data was cross-checked in the DNA bank and proved compatible with the DNA of a man called Mark Allen Norwood. Mark already had a police record for previous crimes, and that is why his data was in the police system. A lawyer named Nina Morrison from the Innocence Project, which is a non-profit foundation that works to acquit prisoners who are serving time for crimes they didn't commit, and another lawyer named John Rayleigh met with investigators responsible for archived cases to seek information regarding this Mark. They discovered that Mark lived less than a mile from Deborah's house the year she was murdered. Mark's DNA samples were also found on Christine's bed and body, and so on October 4th, 2011, at the age of 57, and after serving 25 years of his life sentence, Michael Morton had his trial officially declared a mistrial and was released. It is worth mentioning that during Mark's trial, family members of Christine and Michael attended the hearings. There is even an image of all of them together, which was taken outside the court as they arrived at one of these hearings. In the photo, you can see Michael's brother with his wife, Eric also with his wife, as well as Marilee, Christine's sister, who took custody of Eric. Mark Allen's trial took place on March 27, 2013, and he was accused of being responsible for the death of Christine, 1986, and the death of Deborah, 1988. Mark was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to life in prison. In a powerful statement, Deborah's daughter expressed her disbelief on the injustice committed with Michael was the cause of her mother's death. Because if the authorities had committed themselves to better investigating the case, with the same effort they had to incriminate Michael, Mark could have been arrested and might have been apprehended in time to prevent her mother's murder. Following his release, Michael began to reconnect with Eric, 13 years after their last visit. He met Eric's wife who was pregnant at the time, and later welcomed his granddaughter, Christine Marie, named in honor of Eric's late mother. Today, Michael is a proud grandfather to 3 grandchildren. On March 9th, 2013, at age 59, Michael remarried a woman named Cynthia May Chessman, whom he met at the church he attended. In May 2013, the Michael Morton Law was signed, which decrees that all evidence in favor of a defendant be added to the proceedings and shared with the defense. In November 2013, the judge in Michael's case, Ken Anderson, was sued by the state for the way he handled the case and for not allowing the defense access to some evidence. In a deal, he was ordered to pay a fine of $500, spend 10 days in jail, 5 years of social service, and resigned from his position. In July 2015, Michael published his story in a memoir titled Getting Life, an innocent man's 25-year journey from prison to peace. Due to the poor conduct of the investigations that kept him unjustly imprisoned for 25 years, Michael was awarded $2 million in compensation and received a monthly stipend of $12,000. His case serves as a profound reminder of the importance of justice and accountability within the legal system.